The morning sun spilled through the thin curtains of a small downtown apartment, painting the cracked walls in shades of gold. Inside, Emma Carter stood in front of a fogged mirror, adjusting her blazer for what felt like the 100th time. The fabric was slightly too big on the shoulders, a thrift store find that she had carefully ironed the night before. It wasn't designer, but it was professional enough. Her reflection looked back at her with equal parts hope and anxiety. Today was supposed to be the day, the one she had dreamed of since graduation. The day she'd finally step into the world of corporate marketing, the day her sacrifices, late-night studying, and endless job applications would mean something. She whispered under her breath, "You can do this. Emma, you've worked too hard to let nerves win now." From the small kitchen came the comforting sound of clinking dishes and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. "Emma, don't forget to eat something before you go," called Margaret Carter, her grandmother, whose voice carried the warmth of love and the strength of years. Margaret had raised Emma since her parents passed away when she was 8. She had never complained about the responsibility, even though it meant long hours as a hospital janitor, sore feet, and modest meals. "An empty stomach won't get you through an interview," she added, smiling as Emma appeared, clutching her resume folder like it was a treasure chest. "I know, Grandma," Emma said, kissing her cheek, "but I'm too nervous to eat. It's my first real interview. I can't mess this up." "You won't," Margaret assured, her wrinkled hands squeezing Emma's. "Remember what I always say. Kindness first, success second. People may forget your qualifications, but they'll remember your heart." Emma smiled faintly, though her mind was already racing with facts about Hawthorne & Co., the marketing firm she was heading to. It was one of the most respected in the city, a place where creativity met opportunity. Getting hired there as a junior marketing assistant could mean a new start, not just for her, but for her grandmother, who deserved a life without worry about bills or old hospital shifts. By 8:30, Emma was out the door, her heart thudding as she checked her phone. Her interview was at 10 a.m., and it would take 2 bus transfers to reach the city's central district. She had calculated every minute. The first bus arrived on time, and she found a seat by the window, pulling out her notes and reviewing potential interview questions. Outside, the city pulsed with morning life. Street vendors shouting prices, students rushing past, workers clutching coffee cups as they hurried into glass towers. Emma imagined herself among them one day, purposeful, confident, successful. Her phone buzzed with a message from her best friend, Nora Benson. "You've got this, Em. Don't overthink, just be yourself. Coffee celebration tonight, okay?" Emma smiled, typing back a quick heart emoji. Nora had been her roommate in college, loud, fearless, and endlessly supportive. The complete opposite of Emma's quiet determination. She had promised to treat Emma to coffee no matter how the interview went. "Coffee celebration," Emma whispered to herself. No matter what. The second bus was slightly older, its seats worn and windows scratched with initials of long-forgotten passengers. Emma didn't care. She checked her watch, 9:15 a.m. Perfect. She'd even have time to freshen up and review her talking points before meeting Mr. Robert Langston, the hiring manager. Everything was aligning. For once, it felt like the universe wasn't against her. That feeling lasted exactly 20 minutes. 3 blocks from her destination, the bus jolted to a stop, and a wave of irritated murmurs filled the air. "What now?" someone muttered. Emma craned her neck to look outside. The line of traffic ahead stretched endlessly, horns blaring like a symphony of frustration. The driver leaned toward his radio, muttering something about a breakdown ahead. Emma pressed her face to the window and saw the problem. A sleek black luxury car stalled in the middle of the right lane, smoke gently curling from under the hood. A man in a gray suit stood beside it, phone pressed to his ear, looking both annoyed and helpless. Around him, drivers shouted, pedestrians glared, and the city's rhythm fractured into chaos. Emma checked her phone. 9:40. Her stomach tightened. If the road didn't clear in the next few minutes, she'd be late. No, please not today. She tapped her foot anxiously, glancing at the man again. He was pacing now, running a hand through his dark hair, frustration written all over his face. From his polished shoes to his wristwatch that probably cost more than her entire month's rent. He screamed wealth, and yet in that moment, he looked strangely human. Lost. Stranded. Alone in the sea of angry drivers. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Kindness first. But kindness right now could mean losing the chance she had been waiting for her entire life. You sure you're staying on? The bus driver called as a few passengers began to get off, deciding to walk the remaining blocks. Emma hesitated. Her heart battled her mind. You'll be late. They'll never hire you. But he needs help. She exhaled slowly, gripping her folder tighter. I'll walk, she said. The driver gave her a doubtful look. Suit yourself. But you'll be fighting through traffic, miss. I'll manage, she replied, stepping off into the noise and heat of the street. Cars honked impatiently, the air thick with exhaust. Emma moved between the vehicles, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached the stranded car. The man was still on his phone, clearly not getting any good news. Excuse me, Emma called out, raising her voice over the noise. Do you need help? The man turned, momentarily surprised. Up close, he looked younger than she expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp features, intense blue eyes, and the kind of composure that came from years of being in control. Yet right now he was anything but composed. That's very kind of you, but I'll be fine, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. I've called for roadside assistance, but they're taking forever. Emma glanced at her watch, 9:45. She was already cutting it close. Well, maybe I can help while you wait. What happened? The engine just died, he admitted, frowning at the open hood. No warning lights, no sounds, just stopped. I know nothing about cars. Mind if I take a look? She asked, setting down her folder carefully on the curb. He blinked, surprised. You know about engines? My dad used to fix cars before he passed, she said quietly. I used to help him in the garage. I might not be an expert, but I can check. Alexander Reed, though she didn't know his name yet, hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Be my guest. She rolled up her sleeves, ignoring the disapproving stares of passers-by, and leaned over the engine. The smell of oil and metal filled her senses. It didn't take long to spot the issue, a loose battery cable barely clinging to the terminal. She tightened it with her fingers and said, Try the ignition now. Alexander climbed in, turned the key, and the engine roared back to life like nothing had happened. Relief washed over his face. You've got to be kidding me, he said, laughing lightly. That's all it was? Sometimes small things cause big problems, Emma said with a grin. You should be good now, but get that cable checked properly later. He stepped out of the car, still looking at her as though she'd done something extraordinary. Thank you, he said sincerely. You just saved me from being late to a meeting that could have cost me millions. Emma smiled, picking up her folder. Well, I hope it goes well. I should probably go. I'm running late myself. He frowned slightly. You sure I can't give you a ride? It's the least I can do. She shook her head. That's kind, but my interview's just a few blocks away. I'll be fine. She started to walk off before he could argue further. Wait, what's your name? He called. Emma! She replied over her shoulder, weaving through the traffic. Emma Carter. By the time she reached the glass doors of Hawthorne and Comand, it was 10:07. Her chest tightened as she rushed to the reception desk, breathless, hair slightly out of place. The receptionist gave her a polite but disapproving glance. You're here for the 10 o'clock with Mr. Langston? Yes, Emma Carter, she gasped. I got delayed. Traffic accident on 8th Avenue. The receptionist hesitated. Mr. Langston doesn't tolerate tardiness. He's already moved on to his next appointment. The words hit her harder than she expected. Please, just a few minutes, Emma pleaded. I promise I'm sorry, the receptionist interrupted gently. He's very strict. You can leave your resume, but I can't guarantee he'll review it. Emma stood frozen for a moment, the weight of disappointment pressing down like a storm. All that preparation, all that hope, gone because she'd chosen to stop for a stranger. She left the building quietly, forcing herself not to cry. As she stood outside watching the traffic flow past, she couldn't help but wonder if she'd made the wrong choice. Maybe kindness wasn't always rewarded. Maybe her grandmother's words were outdated in a world that valued punctuality over compassion. She sighed, walking toward the bus stop with heavy steps. Behind her, in a black Mercedes now running perfectly, Alexander Reed watched from the corner of the street. He had followed her out of curiosity, compelled by her selflessness. She had given up something important, he could tell, but she hadn't asked for anything in return. He had met countless people in his life, employees, investors, executives, but very few who stopped to help without reason. As his car merged back into traffic, he made a mental note: Emma Carter. He didn't know why the name mattered yet, but somehow he knew it would. The following morning began quietly in Emma Carter's small apartment. The hum of the city outside felt heavier than usual, as though the world itself carried her disappointment. The interview that was supposed to change her life had slipped through her fingers like sand, and no amount of reasoning could undo it. The silence between her and her grandmother during breakfast said everything. Margaret didn't ask how it went. She could read the answer in Emma's tired eyes in the way she stirred her tea absent-mindedly. "You helped someone, didn't you?" Margaret finally asked softly. Emma blinked, caught off guard. "How did you know?" "Because I know you," the older woman said, setting her cup down. "And because that's what your heart always tells you to do. Tell me what happened." As Emma recounted the story, the broken-down car, the stranger in the expensive suit, the lost opportunity, Margaret listened without interrupting. When Emma finished, frustration leaking into her voice, she said, "Maybe I was foolish. Maybe kindness isn't always rewarded. I worked so hard for that interview, Grandma. And for what? To tighten a loose wire for a man who probably forgot my name 5 minutes later." Margaret smiled faintly, her weathered face glowing with gentle wisdom. "You did the right thing. The world doesn't always pay you back right away, Emma, but it never forgets genuine kindness. Sometimes it circles back when you least expect it." Emma wanted to believe her, but logic and exhaustion weighed her down. She spent the next few days sending more job applications, though her motivation faltered with each polite rejection email. The city felt colder, its rhythm harsher. Rent was due soon, and her grandmother's medical bills were piling up. Still, she pushed forward. Giving up wasn't an option. Every morning she woke before sunrise, helped Margaret with breakfast, and left with her resume tucked under her arm, visiting office after office. Each "we'll call you if we have an opening" chipped away a little more at her optimism. Meanwhile, across the city in a high-rise office overlooking the skyline, Alexander Reed sat at a long glass conference table surrounded by executives in tailored suits. The presentation in front of him was sharp, filled with projections and numbers, but his mind wasn't on it. It kept drifting back to the woman from the street, Emma Carter. The name had lingered in his memory like a melody. He couldn't forget how selflessly she had stopped to help him, how she'd walked away without expecting anything. It was rare to see such unfiltered humanity, especially in his world of contracts and negotiations. When the meeting adjourned, he closed his laptop, his assistant noticing his distraction. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked. "Yes, Clara," he replied absently. "Just thinking." Later that day, as he reviewed potential candidates for a new community outreach project his company was funding, her name appeared again, not directly, but through fate's quiet design. The project partnered with a small local nonprofit called Bright Start Community Center, which had recently hired temporary volunteers to help with event planning and youth marketing. Curious, Alexander requested the roster from his assistant. When he saw Emma Carter listed as a volunteer coordinator, he felt something tighten in his chest, surprise mixed with admiration. Instead of wallowing in disappointment after losing her interview, she had found another way to keep moving forward. Without realizing it, he smiled. At Bright Start, Emma threw herself into her work. It wasn't a high-paying job. In fact, it barely covered transportation and lunch, but it gave her purpose. She organized youth workshops, helped plan fundraisers, and managed social media campaigns for local causes. The environment was different from the corporate world she had dreamed of, but there was warmth here, genuine appreciation instead of polished smiles. The children adored her creativity. Her colleagues respected her quiet diligence, and though she still felt the sting of that missed opportunity, a small part of her began to heal. One Friday afternoon, Bright Start received an unexpected email. A major tech firm, Reed Global Solutions, had expressed interest in sponsoring their annual education drive. The staff buzzed with excitement. The CEO himself, Alexander Reed, wanted to visit the center in person to discuss partnership details. Emma didn't think much of it. Executives often made such appearances for publicity. But the director, Mrs. Hill, was ecstatic. "Emma, I want you to prepare the presentation materials," she said. "You have a gift for storytelling, and we need this proposal to shine." For the next few days, Emma worked late, pouring her heart into the presentation. She crafted a story around the children, the community's struggles, and how education could change their futures. She didn't use corporate jargon. She used emotion, truth, and passion. It reminded her of what she'd always wanted to do, not just market products, but tell stories that mattered. When the day of the meeting arrived, she stood in the community hall adjusting the projector, unaware that destiny was quietly rearranging itself in her favor. The sound of polished shoes on tile made her turn. Standing in the doorway was Alexander Reed, flanked by 2 assistants. He looked exactly as he had that morning on the street, composed, confident, eyes as sharp as ever. But there was something softer in his expression now. Recognition flickered in his gaze the moment he saw her. For a second, the noise of the room faded. He hadn't expected to find her here. She hadn't expected to ever see him again. "Miss Carter?" Mrs. Hill called, unaware of the tension in the air. "This is Mr. Reed, the CEO of Reed Global Solutions. He's here to review our proposal." Emma froze. The name hit her like a wave. Red Global. The man whose car she'd fixed, that man, was the CEO. Her mind scrambled for composure as Alexander extended a hand. "We've met before, I believe," he said, his tone calm but warm, though under very different circumstances. She hesitated before shaking his hand, her cheeks burning. I didn't realize that I wasn't just a man with a broken car." He finished with a faint smile. "I didn't realize you were more than someone just running late," she replied, trying to sound composed. The meeting began, and though Emma's heart raced, she delivered her presentation flawlessly. She spoke about the children's potential, the importance of education, and how corporate collaboration could build lasting change. Her words weren't rehearsed. They came from the soul. Alexander listened intently, watching the way her passion lit up the room. He'd sat through hundreds of presentations in his career, but none had ever felt so real. When she finished, the room fell silent for a moment before filling with applause. "That was remarkable," he said genuinely. "You have a rare ability to connect ideas with emotion, Miss Carter. It's a skill that even professionals struggle to master." After the meeting, as the others discussed logistics, Alexander pulled Mrs. Hill aside. "How long has she been working here?" he asked casually. "Emma?" "Only a few weeks. She's been a godsend. We can't afford to pay her much, but she refuses to leave. Says it keeps her motivated." "Does she have a full-time job elsewhere?" "Not yet. She's been looking, though. Marketing, I believe." That evening, Alexander returned to his office with the decision forming in his mind. He had built his company on efficiency and innovation, but he had always believed that the best employees were those who cared, not just about results, but about people. Emma Carter fit that vision better than any resume on his desk. Yet he didn't want to simply hand her a position. He wanted to see how she would act when she didn't know he was watching, so he devised a quiet plan. Over the next few weeks, Reed Global began indirectly funding Bright Start, and Alexander requested periodic updates from the staff, especially from Emma. She had no idea that her reports were being read by the very man she had once helped. Her updates were heartfelt, detailed, and filled with gratitude for every small success. She mentioned her hopes of building a career in marketing someday, but more than that, she wrote about impact, about wanting to create campaigns that inspired people. Alexander found himself genuinely moved. One evening, he sat in his office long after everyone had gone home, reading her latest message. It ended with a line that lingered in his mind. "Sometimes I still wonder if I made the wrong choice that morning when I stopped to help. But then I look at the faces of the children here and I think maybe life has a different kind of timing than we expect." He leaned back in his chair, smiling slightly. "You didn't make the wrong choice, Emma," he murmured to himself. "You made the only one that mattered." By the time the moon rose over the city, the ripple she had created without realizing it had already begun to shape her future. Opportunities were quietly aligning, doors she couldn't see yet beginning to open. And though Emma still worried about bills, still doubted her worth on sleepless nights, the universe, and one particular stranger she'd once helped, was preparing to remind her that kindness, even when it seems like a setback, is never wasted. The days at Bright Start Community Center settled into a rhythm that felt both comforting and exhausting. Every morning, Emma Carter arrived early, unlocking the front doors before the sun fully rose over the city. The faint hum of traffic outside mixed with the laughter of children inside the center. And though the walls were old and the paint was chipped, the place carried an energy that gave Emma strength. She had begun to find meaning again, even if her dreams of a corporate career seemed distant now. Yet there was something quietly fulfilling about seeing lives being touched by the work she was doing. The smiles of children learning new skills, the relief of parents who felt heard, and the satisfaction of watching projects come together through teamwork and compassion. Still, in the quiet moments between tasks, her mind often wandered back to that interview she had missed and the wealthy man she had helped. The world she once imagined for herself, sleek offices, polished presentations, a nameplate on a desk, now seemed out of reach. She sometimes wondered if her life had already taken its final shape, a small but decent existence devoted to helping others. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't the one she had worked for either. Yet despite the uncertainty, she refused to let bitterness take root. Each time she thought of giving up, her grandmother's words replayed softly in her mind. Kindness opens doors that ambition can't. She didn't yet realize that one of those doors was already beginning to open behind the scenes. Across the city, in the top-floor office of Reed Global Solutions, Alexander Reed stood by the glass wall overlooking the skyline, deep in thought. The city shimmered with ambition and light, and he could see the very streets where his car had broken down weeks ago. It felt poetic now. The moment that had seemed like a minor inconvenience had turned into something far greater. He had never told Emma who he was during his visits to Bright Start. It wasn't deception, it was curiosity. He wanted to understand the woman who had risked her own opportunity for the sake of a stranger. Over the past month, he had watched quietly as she worked, reading her project reports, her email updates, and even visiting the center under the guise of a company liaison. Each encounter only deepened his respect for her. She worked harder than anyone else there, yet never drew attention to herself. Her success wasn't built on ego or strategy. It was driven purely by purpose. One afternoon, Alexander decided to visit Bright Start again, this time without the formal entourage that usually followed him. He arrived in a simple dark jacket and jeans, hoping to blend in. Inside, he found Emma kneeling beside a group of children who were painting a banner for an upcoming fundraiser. She was laughing, her hair slightly messy, sleeves rolled up, streaks of blue paint across her wrist. The sight made him pause. It was such an unfiltered human moment, and something about it made him feel unexpectedly grounded. He wasn't used to environments that weren't polished or controlled. But here, in this modest center with its cracked floors and flickering lights, he saw more sincerity than in any boardroom. "Mr. Reed," Mrs. Hill said brightly when she noticed him hurrying over. "We weren't expecting you today." Alexander smiled. "Please call me Alex," he replied. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see how preparations are going." Emma looked up, startled at the familiar voice. "Oh, Mr. Reed, I didn't realize you were coming." "It's good to see you again, Miss Carter," he said warmly. "Or should I say the heart of this entire operation?" She blushed slightly. "I'm just doing my part." "You're doing more than that," he replied, his gaze steady. "This place feels alive because of people like you." They spent the next hour walking through the facility together, as Emma explained the fundraising plans. She showed him the renovated study room, the new donation tracking system, and the digital outreach campaign she had been designing on an old computer. It was simple but effective, a series of short stories highlighting real children and families impacted by the center. "These are incredible," Alexander said, scrolling through the drafts. "You wrote all of these yourself?" "Yes," she admitted. "I wanted people to see more than numbers or statistics. I wanted them to feel why this matters." "You've succeeded," he said softly. "This is better than half the campaigns my own marketing department produces." She laughed, unsure whether to take it as a joke or a compliment. When he left that afternoon, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. As he drove away, he found himself thinking about her again, not with the detached interest of a CEO evaluating potential talent, but with genuine admiration. There was something about her resilience, her humility, and her quiet strength that drew him in. She reminded him of a time when he himself had believed in people over profits, before success had hardened him into someone who measured everything by return and risk. Emma had no idea she was awakening something in him that he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose that went beyond wealth. Back at Bright Start, the days grew busier. The fundraiser drew near and Emma's workload doubled. She often stayed late into the evening, typing reports or designing materials under the soft hum of the old fluorescent lights. Sometimes when she was alone, she'd catch her reflection in the window and whisper, "You're doing fine, Emma. Just keep going." But despite her determination, exhaustion began to take its toll. One night as she worked late, her phone buzzed with a message from her grandmother reminding her to eat. Smiling, she reached for her bag to grab the sandwich she'd packed, only to find a small envelope resting on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note. "Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed. Keep believing in what you're building. Some of us already do." There was no name, but the handwriting was elegant and confident. She stared at it for a long time, confused but oddly comforted. For the first time in a while, she felt seen. She tucked the note into her journal and got back to work, unaware that Alexander had quietly left it there earlier that day, after stopping by while she was in a meeting. The following week, the fundraiser took place and it was a stunning success. Families filled the hall, laughter and music echoing through the old building. Emma moved from one table to another, making sure everything ran smoothly, barely noticing Alexander observing from the back of the room. He watched her coordinate the event with grace, handling crises calmly and thanking every volunteer personally. When it came time for speeches, Mrs. Hill insisted Emma address the crowd. "I'm not good at speeches," Emma protested softly. "Then speak from your heart," Mrs. Hill replied. Standing on the small stage, microphone trembling slightly in her hands, Emma looked at the faces before her. Children, parents, donors, and volunteers. She took a deep breath and began. "When I first came here," she said, her voice steady but emotional, "I thought I was helping this place. But somewhere along the way it started helping me. I learned that success isn't just about reaching your goals. It's about lifting others as you climb. Every person here has reminded me that purpose is more powerful than position." Her words carried a sincerity that silenced the room. When she stepped down, Alexander was the first to applaud. After the event, as the crowd began to disperse, he approached her. "You were incredible up there," he said. "That wasn't a speech. That was truth." "I just said what I felt," she replied shyly. "Maybe that's why it mattered," he said, his gaze holding hers for a moment that felt longer than it should have. Then he added, "Emma, I want to ask you something. Would you be willing to consult on a small project for my company? Nothing official yet, just helping us craft a few community campaigns." Her eyes widened. "Me? But I'm not qualified. I mean, you're more qualified than you realize," he interrupted gently. "What you've done here is real marketing, connecting people to meaning. That's exactly what the world needs more of." She hesitated, torn between disbelief and gratitude. I'd love to help." "Good," he said with a faint smile. "I'll have my assistant send you the details." That night, Emma walked home through the cool evening air, the city lights shimmering like stars reflected on the streets. She couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't a full-time job yet, but it was something, a spark of possibility she hadn't dared hope for. When she told her grandmother later, Margaret clasped her hands together, tears shining in her eyes. "See, my dear, the world never forgets a good heart. It just takes its time to repay it." Meanwhile, Alexander sat alone in his office, reviewing the latest corporate reports, but his mind kept drifting back to that small community hall, to Emma's voice trembling with honesty, to the reminder that not all success was built in skyscrapers. Something was changing in both their lives, slowly, quietly, profoundly, as two paths that had once crossed by accident were now beginning to run side by side. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was only the beginning of the second chance both of them had been waiting for, one in life and one in meaning. The winter winds had begun to sweep through the city, whispering between glass towers and stirring leaves along the sidewalks as December settled in. For most people, the season brought excitement, lights, and celebrations. For Emma Carter, it carried something quieter but more profound: change. Her small consulting role with Reed Global Solutions had evolved into a steady collaboration over the past few weeks. She worked remotely from the community center or from her modest apartment, crafting digital campaigns and outreach narratives for local partnerships. The company's executives, though initially skeptical of an unofficial contributor, quickly recognized that Emma had a gift. Her words didn't just sell ideas, they inspired people to care. Even the firm's chief strategist remarked during a meeting that her work had the voice of authenticity most agencies spend fortunes trying to manufacture. Yet through all the growing recognition, Emma still hadn't realized the full truth about the man who had opened this door for her. Alexander Reed, who had once appeared to her as a stranded stranger in a stalled car, still maintained a respectful distance from her professional identity. He communicated through formal emails or occasional phone calls, never directly revealing his position as the company's CEO. In their conversations, he preferred to discuss ideas rather than hierarchy. Good marketing, he once said during a call, isn't about convincing people, and it's about connecting with them. And you, Miss Carter, have a natural instinct for that. She remembered smiling softly as she replied, maybe that's because I've had to learn to connect with people before I could ever sell myself. Still, somewhere deep down, she wondered who he really was beneath the calm voice and the reserved charm. He never mentioned his personal life, his background, or his journey to success. To her, he remained a mystery, someone kind yet untouchable, professional yet strangely familiar. But she respected his boundaries. It wasn't her place to question the man who had given her this second chance. At Bright Start, the mood was festive as the holiday season approached. The children were busy rehearsing for their winter charity performance, the walls decorated with handmade snowflakes and colorful lights. Emma had been overseeing a new donation campaign sponsored by Reed Global, which aimed to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. It was the largest project she had ever led, and it filled her with both pride and pressure. Mrs. Hill, ever the supportive mentor, often reminded her to rest, but Emma rarely listened. She was driven not by ambition anymore, but by purpose. Meanwhile, Alexander had been watching quietly from the background. Each week he received progress reports from his departments, numbers, charts, revenue graphs. But what he looked forward to most were the updates from Bright Start that Emma compiled. They were full of small human details others would overlook. How one child had used his first scholarship to buy books for his siblings. How a single mother had cried when her son's education was secured. How volunteers worked past midnight preparing care packages for the community. These weren't metrics. They were moments. And in each of them he saw a reflection of Emma's heart. One snowy evening he decided to visit the center again, not as a CEO, not as a benefactor, but simply as himself. He arrived after hours, the streets quiet except for the crunch of snow beneath his shoes. The building was still lit, and through the glass doors he saw Emma sitting at a desk surrounded by papers and a half-empty cup of coffee. She was clearly exhausted, her posture slumped but her eyes still focused. For a moment he simply watched her, realizing just how much she gave of herself without expecting anything in return. Then he knocked lightly on the door. She looked up, startled, before breaking into a small smile. "Mr. Reed, or should I say Alex, I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I figured you wouldn't be," he said, stepping inside and brushing snow from his coat. "And yet here you are, still working when everyone else has gone home." "Deadlines," she replied with a shrug. "And besides, it's peaceful here when it's quiet." "You remind me of myself," he said softly. "Always trying to fix the world before you fix yourself." She laughed gently. "Maybe, but if I stop, who will?" He walked closer, the warmth of the room softening the chill of the night. "You shouldn't carry everything alone, Emma," he said. "Even good hearts need rest." She looked at him curiously, sensing something unspoken beneath his words. "You talk like someone who's been through it," she said. "I have," he replied, leaning against the desk. "Before all of this, before the suits, the titles, the success, I was just another person trying to prove myself in a world that didn't care who I was. I lost myself for a while chasing the idea of success. Then one morning a stranger reminded me that there's still kindness left in the world. She stopped to help me when she had every reason not to, and she didn't even know who I was." Emma blinked, her mind slowly piecing together his words. "Wait, what do you mean?" He smiled faintly, the kind that carried both guilt and admiration. "It was you, Emma. That morning on 8th Avenue. The car that broke down, the traffic jam, and that was me. You fixed more than my car that day. You reminded me that decency still exists in a world obsessed with gain. For a long moment, she said nothing. The realization sank in like a wave, slow, powerful, disorienting. You're the man from that morning? But you said you never— I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to treat me differently, he interrupted gently. I wanted to see who you truly were without the filter of what I represent. And I did. You're the most genuine person I've ever met, Emma. She stepped back slightly, her emotions caught between shock, disbelief, and a strange sense of betrayal. You mean all this time on the job, the projects, the funding, was because you felt— What, sorry for me? No, he said quickly. Never out of pity. Out of respect. Out of admiration. You lost your chance that day because you helped me. The least I could do was make sure life gave you another one. But don't you see? She said, her voice trembling. You took away my choice to earn it on my own. You could have just told me. I didn't want charity. He looked down, regret flickering across his features. You're right. Maybe I went about it the wrong way. But you didn't get here because of me, Emma. You got here because of who you are. I might have opened a door, but you're the one who walked through it. And everyone who's seen your work knows that. Silence filled the room. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and endless, blanketing the world in white. Emma sat down slowly, her thoughts a storm of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to be angry, part of her wanted to cry, but another part, the deepest part, understood. She had never asked for help, yet it had found her anyway, and it hadn't taken anything away from her effort. It had only given her a chance to prove what she could do. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. You didn't owe me anything, Alexander. I know, he said softly. But sometimes when someone changes your perspective, you feel compelled to change theirs too. And what perspective did I change for you? You reminded me what success is supposed to mean, that it's not measured in numbers but in impact, that maybe wealth is useless unless it makes someone else's life better. For the first time since meeting him, she saw not a billionaire or a CEO, but a man, flawed, sincere, human. The walls of formality between them seemed to fade, replaced by an unspoken understanding that transcended titles or status. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then don't say anything, he replied. Just keep being who you are. That's all the world needs from you. They talked for hours after that, not about business or charity, but about life, dreams, and regrets. She learned that Alexander had started his company from a small garage, surviving on instant noodles and relentless work, and that his success had once come at the cost of his personal happiness. He learned about her struggles, her fears of failure, her grandmother's sacrifices, and the weight of expectations she carried alone. By the time they realized how late it had gotten, the snow outside had turned into a soft white ocean under the streetlights. When they finally stood to leave, Alexander turned to her and said quietly, I don't want this to end here. Emma, you belong somewhere you can truly shine. I want you to join Reed Global full-time, as a creative director for our community division. You've earned it. Her eyes widened in disbelief. That's too much. No, he said firmly. It's exactly right. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of pity or surprise. They were of gratitude, not just for the opportunity, but for the truth. For the journey that had begun with a broken-down car and led her to this moment of realization. Sometimes fate doesn't test you to break you. It tests you to reveal who you are when no one is watching. As she stepped out into the snow, the cold wind brushed her cheeks, but inside her heart, warmth bloomed like spring. Behind her, Alexander watched through the window, a quiet smile on his face. He had given her a chance, but she had given him something greater. The reminder that success without purpose is just an empty victory. And though both of them returned to their own worlds that night, something unspoken bound them together now. Not debt, not obligation, but understanding. The truth had been revealed, and with it came a new beginning neither of them had seen coming. The morning after the snowstorm, the city woke to a blanket of white that softened its sharp edges. The streets glistened under the pale light of dawn, the world quiet as though holding its breath before a new beginning. In a way, that silence mirrored what Emma Carter felt inside. She stood by the window of her small apartment, holding a steaming mug of coffee, still processing everything that had unfolded the night before. The truth had changed everything, not in the way she feared, but in the way life often surprises those who act with pure intentions. Alexander Reed, the man she had once thought was just a stranger in need, was not only the CEO of one of the most powerful firms in the country, but also someone who had quietly reshaped her fate. Yet even as she replayed his words in her mind, there was no resentment left in her heart. What replaced it instead was a strange, profound gratitude. Not because he had helped her succeed, but because his honesty had affirmed what she had always believed deep down, that doing the right thing, even when it costs you, is never in vain. Over the next few days, Emma accepted Alexander's offer to join Reed Global Solutions as the creative director of its community division. It was a position that came with tremendous responsibility, one that few at her age and experience level would ever imagine attaining. Yet it didn't feel unearned. Every campaign she had built, every sleepless night at Bright Start, every decision she had made out of empathy rather than ambition had led her here. When she walked through the towering glass doors of Reed Global on her first official day, she didn't see it as a triumph of luck. She saw it as the reward for perseverance. The marble floors, the polished elevators, the breathtaking skyline views, they were symbols not of privilege but of possibility. Her badge, marked director, wasn't just a title. It was a promise to use this platform to bring light where others had overlooked it. Inside the office, employees greeted her with polite curiosity. Many had heard about her unconventional rise, the woman from the community center who had caught the CEO's attention, but she quickly disarmed their assumptions with humility. Instead of hiding behind her new title, she sought collaboration, learning from every department, asking questions, listening before speaking. She didn't act like someone who wanted to prove her worth. She acted like someone who wanted to make a difference. Within weeks, her division began to take shape, her leadership style refreshing in its compassion. Meetings that once focused solely on quarterly targets now included discussions about social impact, community engagement, and ethical storytelling. She encouraged her team to think, not in terms of profits but in terms of people. "We're not just selling dreams," she would say during brainstorming sessions. "We're building trust. That's the real currency." Alexander often observed her from a distance during those first few weeks, quietly proud but cautious not to overshadow her progress. He knew the whispers circulating in the corridors, rumors that she had been given favoritism, that she didn't earn her seat. He also knew she would silence those doubts the only way she knew how, through excellence. And she did. The first major project under her leadership was a nationwide campaign called Hands That Build, highlighting local workers, teachers, and volunteers who kept their communities strong despite hardships. The campaign combined Emma's storytelling with innovative digital outreach, and within days it went viral. Messages poured in from people across the country who saw themselves reflected in the stories. For the first time in the company's history, a corporate campaign had touched hearts instead of just markets. When the board reviewed the project results, the metrics were undeniable. Engagement rates had tripled, brand reputation soared, and media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. But what struck Alexander most wasn't the data. It was the expression on Emma's face during the presentation. She wasn't basking in applause or recognition. She was smiling quietly, as though the true reward was simply seeing people connect with something meaningful. After the meeting, he approached her in the hallway. "You've done something extraordinary," he said. "You've reminded this company what it's supposed to stand for." She met his gaze with the same sincerity that had once compelled her to stop on that busy street months ago. "I only reminded them of what you already believed. Mr. Reed, you just needed to see it again." As weeks turned into months, their professional partnership deepened into something more profound, an unspoken understanding between two souls who had both been shaped by struggle, kindness, and quiet courage. They often found themselves in long conversations after hours, not about business but about life. Emma spoke about her grandmother, about the quiet resilience of those who give everything yet expect nothing. Alexander shared stories from his early days when he had nearly lost his company and faith in people, until a moment of compassion restored both. There was a connection between them that neither had sought but both found impossible to ignore. Not romantic at first, but rooted in something rarer, mutual respect, the recognition of shared humanity. One evening, long after most employees had left, Alexander invited Emma to the rooftop garden above the office. a serene space overlooking the glittering city skyline. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the plants around them. "Do you ever think about that morning?" he asked, hands resting on the railing. She smiled softly. "Every now and then. It feels like a different lifetime." "It changed mine," he admitted. "You might not believe this, but I was tired of people then. Everything felt transactional. Every smile had a motive, every deal had a hidden cost. Then you showed up. A stranger who didn't know or care who I was, who just saw someone in need and helped. You restored something I'd forgotten." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "And you reminded me that sometimes life delays our dreams to give us something better. Perspective." They stood in silence for a moment, the city stretching endlessly before them. "You know," he said finally, turning toward her, "I used to think success was about building empires. Now I think it's about building people. And kindness builds both," she replied softly. He smiled, and for a fleeting second, the distance between their worlds, wealth and simplicity, power and humility, disappeared. By spring, Emma had become one of the most respected figures in Reed Global. Her campaigns were studied in universities, her interviews published in magazines, and yet she never allowed the spotlight to change her. Every few weekends she returned to Bright Start, still volunteering quietly, still checking in on the children who had become part of her heart. The center now thrived, newly funded and expanded thanks to corporate partnerships she had initiated. Her grandmother, Margaret, who had spent her life worrying about ends meeting, now sat proudly in the front row during community events, often teary-eyed but smiling. "You see, my dear," she told Emma one afternoon, "life didn't forget your kindness. It just waited for the right time to reward it." A year after she joined the company, Emma stood once again before a mirror, adjusting her blazer. This time, not out of nervousness, but gratitude. She was preparing to deliver a keynote speech at a global conference on ethical leadership. As she looked at her reflection, she thought of the girl she once was, standing at a bus stop worried about being late, unsure of her worth, doubting if kindness had a place in ambition. Now she knew the answer. Kindness wasn't a weakness. It was the strongest form of courage, the kind that creates ripples beyond one lifetime. When she walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She waited for it to fade before speaking. "A few years ago," she began, her voice calm yet powerful, "I missed an interview that I believed was my one shot at success. I helped a stranger instead. At that moment, I thought I had lost everything. But what I didn't realize was that I had found something greater: purpose. Kindness doesn't always bring immediate rewards. Sometimes it brings lessons. Sometimes it brings people. And sometimes, if you're patient, it brings you back to the life you were meant to live." In the front row, Alexander watched her with quiet pride. He didn't see the woman who had once been his helper or employee. He saw his equal, a symbol of everything he wanted his company and himself to stand for. As she concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation, but Emma's gaze found only one face in the crowd. She smiled, not out of triumph but peace. That night, as the city glowed with countless lights, Emma returned home, where her grandmother waited with 2 mugs of cocoa. "You changed so many lives today," Margaret said, handing her one. Emma shook her head gently. "I didn't change lives, Grandma. I just reminded people that they can still choose kindness." And as she looked out the window at the quiet city, the same city that had once tested her patience, "Faith and heart," she whispered to herself. "You were right all along. Kindness opens more doors than ambition ever could." The universe, it seemed, had heard her long before she ever doubted it.